The Senate returned this week with a great sense of purpose and a great responsibility to work to get our state through this crisis, address the harm that COVID-19 has caused our constituents and our economy and our state budget, and continue our work on serious chronic issues facing Californians. This pandemic has uprooted our lives and our state's financial outlook. It's shattered our economy's trajectory, just as it devastated millions of families, neighbors, and friends. But it failed to eliminate the resiliency of our communities and our collaborative and giving spirit. It's failed to eliminate our determination to find solutions that will help heal the impact it's had on our California economy and our people. The Senate Democratic Caucus, as well as the Senate Working Group on Economic Recovery, has been hard at work in recent weeks to determine solutions that offer responsible ways to approach our state's budget and mitigate the financial impacts of COVID-19 on California. Our approach aims to keep the budget balanced through the use of reserves, federal support, and a pragmatic approach to spending decisions that go beyond just the upcoming budget year. I want to pause there for a moment to key in on that one point. We are continuing our multi-year approach that's been a cornerstone of our responsible budgeting over the past decade. We will not look to just cobble together a budget that's precariously balanced for 2021, but instead pass a budget with a projected balance in 2021, 2022, and a stronger position beyond that. Just as Californians who lost jobs and livelihoods will bear the brunt of those losses for years, so too will our state. And we have to plan for it, strategize for it, and find ways to overcome it. Our approach does just that. In addition to our responsible multi-year outlook, our budget approach seeks to avoid becoming part of the economic problem. This first do no harm approach means avoiding major ongoing program cuts or broad middle-class tax increases that may pencil out on some temporary spreadsheet, but actually cause more economic damage and prolong our budget struggles. We know that we have upwards of $100 billion of solutions. With our own tools in the toolbox combined with existing and anticipated federal support to keep our budget balanced. My colleague, Senator Mitchell, who chairs the Senate Standing Committee on Budget and Fiscal Review, will explain this in further detail in just a moment. We're also recommending two specific proposals that would directly help Californians and boost our state's economic recovery. One would create a renter-landlord stabilization program, which would enable agreements between renters, landlords, and the state to resolve unpaid rents over a limited time period. The other proposal would create a $25 billion economic recovery fund through the establishment of prepaid future tax vouchers, which will have the effect of providing economic stimulus now and accelerating future revenues. My colleagues, Senators Bradford and Senator Hertzberg, will talk more about these proposals a little bit later during this call. Our goal with these proposals is to offer ideas for our state budget and recovery that maintain a conscientious approach to spending while also focusing on the needs of all Californians. As this crisis showed us, a decade of responsible budgeting meant California was better prepared for an economic downturn. That was the hypothetical rainy day we had hoped we'd never need. But it's one we are well positioned to weather thanks to our sensible approach when times were good. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Senator Holly Mitchell, to talk more about the specifics of our budget approach. Senator Mitchell.
Thank you very much, Madam Pro Tem. I just can't help but thinking when you and I joined the freshman class and took our oath of office in 2010 while we were experiencing tough fiscal times then as a state. Neither of us ever imagined we would be living during times like this. But I'm certainly proud to serve under you as our leader as we navigate our way out of this on behalf of all Californians. So good morning. Let me start by reiterating the comments made by the Pro Tem that we are experiencing an unprecedented public health pandemic that has catapulted us into a deep recession. That's our reality. And as the LAO recently stated in their spring finance letter, the severity of the recession and its impact on Californians will depend not only on the depth of the downturn, but also on how long this crisis lasts. Ultimately, I know that California is strong and we will meet this challenge. You heard the top guiding principles that will guide the budget deliberations for the State Senate. We will continue to be responsible. We're going to look beyond just the budget year and past the budget package that is balanced in 2020-21 and also projected to be balanced in 21-22. And we will not become a part of the problem. We will aim to avoid major ongoing program cuts and middle-class tax increases to cause additional economic harm. Our goal will be to keep the budget balanced. Fortunately, we are entering this recession after a decade of responsible budgeting and responsible saving, which has better prepared California for this economic downturn, better prepared us than the state experienced in the last Great Recession when we did not have record level savings. And so how are we going to do that? It will be done by a mixture of strategies. We'll tap into our reserves. We'll use other traditional tools that we've used in the past during tough economic times, like fund shifts, special fund borrowing, deferrals, and ultimately some targeted belt tightening. What do we mean by that? Opportunities like the governor Department of Finance already released in their letter several weeks ago, where we'll look at freezing travel, freezing program growth, other ways to spend more responsibly. And so as the Pro Tem mentioned, we already have identified about $100 billion in ways in which we can stem this tide. About $41 billion tapping into both reserves, spending reductions, fund shifts, internal loans, and deferrals. What will be critical is our ongoing support from the federal government. We've already received, through the increased federal share of Medi-Cal costs, about $5.8 billion, the CARES Act, which will cover expenditure increases due specifically to COVID-19 related expenses at $9.5 billion, the federal cost recovery at $5.3 billion, and pending, it is our full intention and our hope that the federal government will continue to provide support to the tune of our guesstimates at $33 billion. Again, all in total, we anticipate these solutions equaling about $100 billion. What's important in this overall budget approach is also keeping our eye on economic recovery as a result of COVID-19. And so next you're going to hear about two proposals from my colleagues who are appointed by the Pro Tem to chair the economic recovery, the Working Group on Economic Recovery. They are Senators Steve Bradford and Senator Bob Hertzberg. First up will be Senator Bradford.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell, and thank the Pro Tem for appointing both myself and Senator Hertzberg on the Economic Recovery Task Force. Let me first start out by saying that what we're outlining today is still a work in progress, and as it moves to the legislative process, we'll further define what we're developing here. I'm being tasked with the tenant-landlord stabilization, and as part of the response to COVID-19, the Senate is proposing a substantial relief program to help cushion the blow for both tenants and landlords. Because as we all heard, one of the biggest impacted areas outside of those folks who have been physically impacted by the disease is fearful of losing their homes and their roof over their heads. There are estimated 2.3 million renter households in California with one or more workers from the industry that's been hurt by COVID-19. Half of those households were already rent burden before the crisis. Even those who were getting unemployment insurance are struggling to cover their rent, especially if they live in the Bay Area or Los Angeles. A significant number of tenants are struggling to afford their rent, and that failure to collect rent may cause some landlords to fall far behind on their own mortgages. Recognizing that, the Senate proposal I'm walking you through right now is intended to cushion the blow for both groups. But one thing I want to stress is that this is not a giveaway to anyone. It's not a free ride. The Senate is giving tenants and landlords a hand up, not a handout. We expect the skip rents to be repaid, but we're giving tenants 10 years to do so. Our goal is to keep tenants housed and keep landlords out of foreclosure, with the goal of keeping roofs over everyone's heads. The last thing we want to do is to increase our homeless population. Under this proposal, tenants who are struggling to pay rent will be able to enter into a voluntary agreement with the state and the landlord. The state will protect tenants from eviction and will give landlords transferable tax credits equal to the dollar amount of the rent that the tenants were unable to pay. Tenants will be able to spread this repayment of their missed rent over a 10-year period beginning in 2024. This should give people time to get back on their feet once the economy begins to recover. Tenants will not pay any interest on past rent. This will also be a hardship. There will also be a hardship exemption for tenants who continue to struggle, which will result in some tenants having their back rent forgiven altogether. Next, the landlords will have to provide rent relief to their tenants and commit to not to evict those tenants. Again, a voluntary program for the landlords. In return, to keep landlords with non-paying tenants out of foreclosure, the state will provide these landlords with tax credits equal to the amount of rent lost. The landlords aren't getting a handout. They have to claim those tax credits over a 10-year period as well, in tax years beginning in 2024 to 2023, with 1/10 of the value being able to claim each of those years. Some landlords landlords are likely to keep and use those tax credits. Others who are short on cash will be able to sell them immediately to help make mortgage payments. The transferability of tax credits allow them to be sold on the open market. This proposal is not for large corporate landowners. Let me stress that again. It's not for large corporate landowners. It's for the small mom and pop landlords who are own renter-occupied properties and helping them to avoid foreclosure. Many of these units are owner-occupied. Many of these units are owned by our essential workers, our nurses, our teachers, our bus drivers, and even some of our local, state, and federal elected officials who are some of these mom and pop landlords. We will keep tenants housed, and we're keeping their landlords out of foreclosure. As we learned during the Great Recession, no one but speculators benefit from a foreclosure market. The state will recoup the cost of this program over time as tenants repay the missed rent in small amounts subject to the hardship exemption. These payments will fund most of the cost of the tax credits provided to the landlords, which come due parallel to the tenants' payments. This program minimizes general fund impacts, particularly during the next 2 fiscal years. This enables us to help put people at risk of eviction and homelessness while also responding, as we must do, to the current budget problems. This design gives the program maximum flexibility, bandwidth despite significant shortfalls in the budget revenue. This is how we care for our most vulnerable populations in California. Next up is Senator Bob Hertzberg.
Thank you, Senator Bradford. Thank you for your hard work in the Economic Recovery Group. Madam Budget Chair, for your good work, and Madam Pro Tem for your extraordinary team and leadership on all of this. I really appreciate it. You know, we have been working pretty hard over the last number of weeks, spending around the clock, working weekends, looking at a series of options of how do we responsibly, as was framed out by the President Pro Tem, how do we move forward? How, as we have all this pressure on the state with respect to potential budget cuts that I think was appropriately articulated by the budget chair, how do we, independently of the budget, figure out a way forward that gets people back to work as quickly as possible? Fourth quarter, as the PPP money starts to run out from small businesses, how do we engage folks? The answer here, what we have before us, that's this larger idea, is a $25 billion economic recovery fund. $25 billion. We intend to fill it up over the next 2 years. What are we going to do with the money? Well, it's really about putting folks back to work, about in supporting the important values of what we're about in California. What does that mean? Small businesses, not-for-profits, worker retraining relating to economic recovery, because we're going to have to do that as people have to change their jobs in the new environment. Residential and small business rental assistance, as Senator Bradford just discussed. The green economy investments, multi-year commitments to the homeless crisis that may certainly be exacerbated by this problem. School funding, which is mostly harmed by these school closures, again tied to economic recovery. So that's what we're trying to accomplish in the near term and getting money available to do that ASAP without harming the budget. Well, then you ask yourself, well, where's the money going to come from? The state would establish a voluntary tax program to incentivize prepayment of approximately $3 billion a year of income taxes, corporate and personal income taxes, for the years 2024 through 2033, 10-year event horizon. Participating taxpayers acquire a California Recovery Tax Voucher for those years at a modestly reduced amount to reflect inflation and to incentivize participation. As most know, the cost of borrowing is the least today that we've seen forever, I should say in the longest period of time, not forever, but for a long period of time, and would be the smartest time to be able to issue these tax vouchers. These California Recovery Tax Vouchers will be fully transferable, so a taxpayer could sell those tax vouchers to third parties to get cash benefits at any time. So if you decided to buy a tax voucher and you needed the money, you could sell it. If the assessment you made with respect to your taxes, you had additional tax vouchers, you could sell them. What are the trade-offs by virtue of doing this? On the one hand, California gets up to $25 billion over a 2-year period, immediate money to help put people to work. Loses about $3 billion a year between 2024 and 2033. The idea is by stabilizing the economy, baseline revenues will be higher to offset the costs in the years 2024 to 2033. The ultimate effect, of course, would enable taxpayers to invest in California to help California struggling during this very challenging crisis and to accelerate resources for better times ahead in today's downturn when revenues are more crucially needed. Bottom line is this is one of a series of ideas that the Pro Tem mentioned at the beginning, where we're trying to take a thoughtful and responsible approach toward an economic recovery with a budget that does no harm. And with that, I will turn it back to Madam Pro Tem.
Well, thank you, Senator Hertzberg, Senator Bradford, and Senator Mitchell. I think right now I'd like to open up for discussion for questions from members of the media on the call. So, Lizelda, I will turn it back to you to facilitate that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Operator, please instruct listeners on how to ask a question, and please mention them when they are open.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen on the phone lines, if you wish to ask a question, please press 1 then 0 on your touch-tone phone. You're going to hear acknowledgement that you've been placed in queue. If you want to take yourself out of the queue, just repeat the 1-0 command. Again, for questions, please press 1-0 at this time. Our first question today comes from the line of Adam Beam, representing the Associated Press. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for doing the call. My question is about the budget. I know that Governor Newsom has said that the state's really going to be depending on the federal government to help fill some of these gaps. My question is, do we know? We don't really know if that money is going to come. Do you have contingencies in place? Are you going to prepare like 2 versions of the budget, one with federal help and one without?
Thank you for the question, Adam. I'm going to just make one comment and then turn it over to the budget chair. We certainly hope that the federal government will continue to be our partner. The governor, as you've heard on his calls, has continued to speak with leadership in Congress and with the administration. We feel comfortable that we can weather the first year, but the second year, particularly for local governments as well as the state, it will become more difficult. Senator Mitchell, do you want to add anything to that?
I would agree to the comments made by the pro tem, and I think we've got to acknowledge what the federal government has done thus far. You know, the governor proposed his January budget that did not include resources for MCO tax extension, and we got it. The 75-25% match on COVID-19 related expenses through FEMA was wonderful, and we know that the governor's talked about and OES has talked about other asks of the federal government with a heightened level of federal state match. And so, and lastly, you know, the governor has submitted the letter with the other western states governors asking for $1 trillion worth of support. And so it's been going well so far. I'm gonna knock on wood, Adam, and hope that the federal government continues to understand the nature of the magnitude of this public health pandemic that has led us into this recession. You know, California had been experiencing a multi-year strong recovery where our last several budgets have included wonderful investments to support California infrastructure and in Californians. And so it is a recession brought on by a pandemic, and we fully expect the federal government to continue to step up and provide assistance to states and other local government.
Next question.
Our next question will come from the line of John Horn with ABC KG-TV San Diego. Please go ahead.
Hey everyone, I have two questions actually. One, I wanted to clarify the corporate-owned part of the rent program. It sounded like it wouldn't be out those big companies, those big management companies like the Irvine Company and things like that would not be eligible for this. So if there's a tenant in those units, is this going to be available for them to get that assistance? That's question number one. And question number two would be, would you have any more details on the forgiveness program for renters that can't make the payment?
Sure. Thank you, John. Good to hear a voice from San Diego. I think one of the things I want to point out, mom and pop's small owners is our first priority. I think they feel the hurt most directly and immediately. But actually, I think the intention is to thoughtfully look for ways to expand this. The key has got to be for all tenants. And so I think we want to put the proper parameters around it, make sure that it's a program that is used for the purpose it's intended and not to help some interest that might try to take advantage of it. So the intention is to help all tenants and certainly not leave out larger owners, but to make sure the program is responsible. Let me just make sure if there's nothing further to add on that. And then, John, the second part of your question, remind me what your second question.
I just wanted to know if you had more details on like what the qualifications would be for the forgiveness program.
I think probably we're going to let staff at the end respond to some of the technical issues and questions. So if you'll hang on, I would appreciate that. We'll let them get into the weeds on some of those more technical questions. And thank you, John, for being on the call today.
Sure, thank you.
Our next question will come from the line of Adam Ashton. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you for having this call. I had two questions I wanted to ask. One is I was hoping that Senator Mitchell might elaborate on deferrals. Does that mean like delaying capital projects? What did you mean by deferring some spending? And the second question is that $33 billion that California anticipates receiving from the federal government, do we imagine that as being like unrestricted, or is this reimbursing the state specifically for coronavirus spending?
We anticipate that the $33 billion at this point would be unrestricted. That's because that's what the governor asked for in his letter to the administration. The first question, I lost it just that quick. I'm sorry. Repeat your first question.
Oh, deferrals.
Oh, the deferrals.
Capital projects, or what do you mean by that?
There are all kinds of examples of how we have deferred in the past. And so, and again, we don't have a working list currently. But deferrals, is the kind of thing that allows us to push costs into a different fiscal year. So past examples of deferrals have been where we, paid, CalPERS one day into the new fiscal year. I think your issue with regard to capital campaigns would probably fit more appropriately into our belt tightening category, where we're looking at state expenditures or allocations that were already budgeted that we might need to reevaluate. But again, these are all strategies that we've used in the past for various reasons. But again, the deferrals, I think a more appropriate example is when we've pushed costs into future fiscal years.
Thank you.
And we'll go to the line of Laura Mahoney with Bloomberg. Please go ahead.
About this voluntary prepayment of taxes program, you're saying that there would be a modestly reduced amount that people would have to pay. What is this incentive? How would it work?
Well, thank you, Laura. This is Bob Hertzberg. The markets would determine that. Currently, bonds are being sold by the state at 2.5%. There's a lot of capital in the market, and the discount rates are pretty much determined. At the end of the day, the markets will determine what that discount rate is. The notion would be, in terms of our preliminary thinking, is that the tax vouchers would be tax-free for California taxes, at least, and then that would help reduce the costs of what the state would have to pay. But it's usually just 2 to 3% what the current cost is. It's literally like commercial paper. You're just paying in advance to be able to have the state have some money, and then you have a value to pay your taxes in the future. So it's literally looking like any other financial instrument. And that's pretty much what the market rate is. That's what we're looking at.
So it would be kind of like selling bonds?
Well, it's not borrowing, but it's similar too in terms of pricing. That's about how the market works. Well, what rate of return? If you go to put money in a bank account, savings account today, you probably don't even get 1%. This way, we'll get a better return on your money, equivalent to what the state normally pays, which is, I think, we went out on the 16th of April, and I think it was 2.85 cents, something like percent.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
And, thank you. Next, we'll go to the line of Alexia Kosov, representing the San Francisco Chronicle. Please go ahead.
Hey, Senators. I wanted to ask you about this keeping budget balance slide. Are you it mentions potential available solutions up to about $95 billion. Is that the budget shortfall that you're anticipating needing to deal with over the next 2 years? And in terms of these other solutions that you're talking about, the recovery fund or the rent stabilization fund, have you talked at all with the Assembly or the Governor's office about these ideas yet?
That is, the $100 billion does not reflect our anticipation at this point of what the deficit will be. The governor released his statement, a projection of $54.3 billion. The LAO in their spring finance letter paint a very different picture, a range from 18 to 31 billion. So we in the legislature anxiously await receiving the governor's May revise that gives us specifics in terms of how he arrived at that number. But it does not reflect, this proposed solution does not reflect us anticipating a deficit of this size. We merely wanted to look at a strategy, an overall approach that reflects the values of the Senate, that we don't intend to levy huge cuts to programs that California residents are going to need to be able to weather this current storm. And so, yes, please do not interpret this $100 billion number as any indication of our current anticipation based on what we know today of what the whole will be.
Alexi, I would just add, in terms of our proposals, we can't do this by ourselves. We've begun a conversation that will include the Assembly and the Governor as well. And so we hope to continue this conversation in earnest as possible solutions that don't have a negative budget impact in the short term.
We fully anticipate on the Senate side receiving the May revise on Thursday, and we'll begin our full budget review process in earnest the following Monday with a Senate overview hearing, subcommittee hearings, and that's when we'll begin to really be able to dig into the May revise and begin to share our perspective about a solution for a balanced budget that will be voted on before June 15th, or at least by June 15th.
Next question.
And ladies and gentlemen, if there are additional questions, please press 1 followed by the 0, and we'll go to Matt Levin's line with California Matters. Please go ahead.
Hi, Senators. Thanks for taking questions. I have a couple questions on the renter landlord assistance portion of this. What happens if a renter wants to participate in the program but a landlord doesn't? And then also, do you have any dollar amount, any price tag that you've estimated yet for the tax credits that landlords might claim?
As far as dollar amount of tax credits, not yet. It's still a work in progress. As for a renter who wants to participate in a landlord, we're working that out. It's a voluntary program, but we hope the incentives that are being put in place will incentivize landlords to participate just as well as the incentives that we're putting in place that will incentivize the renters to participate. But we're trying to work those details out, but we're hoping, based on the benefits that we've laid out, both renter and landlord would participate in the program.
Next question.
We'll go to Laurel Rosenhal's line with Cal Matters. Please go ahead.
Thank you. One of my questions was covered earlier, but on a related question, just in terms of the process of collaborating with the Assembly and the Governor, it seems a little bit unusual for the Senate to make a proposal of this magnitude before the May revise has been released, and I was just wondering if anyone could sort of speak to the process of why you seem to be sort of jumping out ahead of what we would, how things would normally.
Well, actually, I think the Assembly has done a budget picture in advance the last several years. The Rainy Day Fund was actually an Assembly proposal that came out years ago that was a discussion with the Governor, and he embraced it and took it to the next level. And of course, having Governor Brown be the face of a rainy day fund made it a positive thing for the Senate, the Assembly, and the Governor. So it's not uncommon. We just, Laurel, we've been home in our districts dealing with constituents who were in great pain and anxiety for the last 8 weeks. And so with Senators Hertzberg and Bradford getting underway on the Economic Recovery Working Group, Senator Mitchell had a special budget hearing while we were in recess. I think we spent our time wisely trying to figure out how we could help solve problems for California. And this is our suggested way of solutions, and we hope it's well received. So far, it seems to have been. I've certainly made sure that the Governor was aware that we had proposals, the Speaker, my colleague, my partner. So we hope this will be received in the attention that it's giving, which is positive solutions for California.
And I would just add to that, Madam Pro Tem, every year the Senate comes up with a set of guiding principles to identify the architecture of how we're thinking through what a budget should look like. And so this isn't a budget plan. This is, again, our top guiding principles, which is that we will continue to be responsible and that we don't intend to become a part of the problem. We only went a step further to begin to think through potential available solutions. And again, the bottom line dollar figure we came up with does not match with the number that the Governor's already proposed as what he perceives to be the current budget deficit. So I think this is in keeping with what we've done in the past. Clearly, receiving a May revise that will be really for all intents and purposes, a new budget. Recognizing we have 30 days to respond, we are doing all we can to gather data, review the spring fiscal report, anxiously await the release of the May revise so we can get started on the real work ahead for all Californians. But I don't think this is out of step with what we've done in the past. We are expressing our value statement in terms of what we hope to be reflected in the ultimate budget passed by both houses and signed by the governor.
Next question?
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
And we have a question from Hannah Wiley with the Sacramento Bee. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. So during the Great Recession, the state had made 3 budgets in about 18 months and had struggles paying the bills. It was just a fast-changing situation, as some of you had mentioned you remember. So I guess, Senator Mitchell, why do you think it's possible to make a solid budget that will last a year and avoid cutting IOUs?
Well, this is a different scenario than what we experienced in 2009. 2009, I think we knew the whole. In 2009, it was required 2/3 vote. In 2009, didn't require a balanced budget by June 15th, which is now a constitutional requirement, thanks to the voters of California. So we're in a very different environment than we were in 2009. And so, again, it's also our desire to put forward a honest, responsible document based on the information we'll have. We know that minor adjustments will be made into late summer, perhaps early fall, because we will then know by July 15th the true income of the state, because income taxes will have been collected. And so by pushing that date out to align it with the federal government delay, to help California residents in this time of crisis, was a responsible thing for us to do. It also complicates our ability to fully understand the true health of the general fund. So we will pass a balanced budget June 15th. We will continue to do minor adjustments as we learn and receive more data into late summer, early fall.
Thank you. Next question?
We have no further questions queued up at this time.
Operator, at this time, staff is happy to answer any detailed questions on backgrounds. Can you remind folks how to ask questions? And we will definitely take a question from John, but let me have the senator say her goodbye.
Well, just very quickly, on behalf of the Majority Leader, Senator Hertzberg, the Budget Chair, Senator Mitchell, and the Chair of Banking and Finance, Senator Bradford, we want to thank you for your questions, and we look forward to having further conversations as we get the proposal from the governor and continue to do our work. I will turn it over to staff right now to answer questions, particularly the one I know that John Horn had, and there might have been one other detail-oriented question. But thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.